The Asus GeForce RTX 3070 Nocta boldly goes where no graphics card has gone before, at least not without heavily modding the card on your own. Disclaimer: I love unique-looking graphics cards, and I generally think bigger is better. Sure, RGB bling and high factory overclocks are fun, but this monstrous love child of Asus and Nocta is something entirely different. Were it not for the high price and somewhat limiting choice of GPU, this could be one of the best graphics cards of all time. But seriously, look at that thing. It takes up 4 freaking slots. I hope you don't want to use any other PCIe peripherals in your rig. Originally revealed with a theoretical starting price of just $499, the GeForce RTX 3070 basically delivered equivalent performance to the previous generation RTX 2080 Ti. Unfortunately, as our GPU price index shows, real-world prices on the RTX 3070 and any other modern graphics card land significantly higher than suggested prices. Asus didn't specify a price for the 3070 Nocta, but a look online reveals that it's currently selling at $1,300 or more. Sigh. At least Ethereum's switch to proof-of-stake is moving forward, albeit slowly. One thing to note with the Asus Nocta card is that this isn't the highest clocked RTX 3070 from the company. The RTX 3070 OIGN-AQA, to use the formal model number, sports a boost clock of 1845 MHz when you utilize Asus GPU tweak in select OC mode. That's a pretty healthy bump in clock speeds relative to NVIDIA's 1725 MHz boost clock for the reference design, but it still falls short of the Asus Strix model's 1935 MHz OC mode boost clock, and the Strix is available in both white and black/gray variants. It just so happens that we have a white RTX 3070 Strix card in our labs, so we'll actually be able to quantify the differences in terms of performance as well as power, thermals, noise, and size. Here's the rundown of specs, with the Asus Nocta and Strix cards compared to NVIDIA's reference Founders Edition. Besides the difference in boost clocks, and again, we're using the OC mode's boost clocks for the Asus cards, the real difference comes in the form of size. The RTX 3070 Founders Edition tips the scales at a relatively svelte 1034, while the Nocta card weighs 50% more, and the Strix card is a hefty 70% increase. Weight alone doesn't really determine cooling, though it can certainly be a factor, with heatsink surface area being the other major factor. NVIDIA's Founders Edition uses a 2-slot cooler and a 12-pin power connector with an adapter cable that links to a single 8-pin PEG connector. It's relatively compact, measuring 242 x 112 x 38 mm. The 3070 Strix is the longest of the 3 cards, at just over 12.5 inches, 322 x 129 x 60 mm by our measurements, while the Nocta more than doubles the size of the Founders Edition at 308 x 126 87 mm. It's wide enough that it might even interfere with a card installed 4 slots over. By volume, the Nocta cooler and card are about 35% larger than the already sizable Strix card. All of that extra cooling capacity has to be good for something, and as we'll see later, it is. Temperatures are lower than the other 3070 cards on the Nocta, as are noise levels, but are they low enough to justify the higher price and large card size? If you're trying to build a Nocta-themed PC, sure, most people will likely be more interested in saving money. Not that any RTX 3070 comes cheap, but there are definitely cheaper options than the Asus 3070 Nocta card. I've seen some cards that flirt with a 4-slot design in various ways. Gigabyte did some Aorus 3.5 to 4-slot with cards, and Colorful had the hybrid 4-fan card that used more than the traditional 3 slots with its RTX 3080 Ti. But this is the first true 4-slot GPU I've ever tested. I tried to take some comparison pictures with the Nocta model posted next to the other 3070 cards, but the pictures just don't do it justice. In person, the Nocta takes up a lot of space. Putting it in my test PC with a standard mid-tower ATX case, there's not much room for anything else. Of course, the real stars of this show are the Nocta fans. They're standard 120 Nocta designs, measuring 25 mm thick and with a sufficiently large shroud to accommodate them. Despite the size, the fans don't necessarily move huge quantities of air, as they're relatively low RPM models. Asus didn't shrink the heatsink portion of the card to make room for the fans, however, which is how it ended up with the quadruple slot width. It's basically a 2.5 slot card and heatsink design paired with fans that take up an additional 1.5 slots of thickness. Besides being the traditional tan and brown associated with Nocta fans, Note also that there's absolutely no RGB lighting on Asus Nocta card. Presumably, that's because one of Nocta's driving principles is that you shouldn't notice the fans. They're there to do a job, not to draw attention through flashing lights or other gimmicks. That means you won't have to worry about deciding what color of lighting goes best with brown, and you also don't need to install Asus or Sync software, at least not for the graphics card. Like other Asus cards, the Nocta comes with a switch that allows you to select performance or quiet mode, both of which slightly alter the GPU power target and clocks. Installing GPU Tweak Roman 3 can accomplish the same thing, and opens the door to a third OC mode that bumps up the power limit and increases the boost clock by 30 MHz. We used OC mode for all of our performance tests on both Asus cards, but we did do a few spot checks that indicated only adds about 1–2% more performance than the default mode of operation. It would be interesting to be able to directly compare the cooling and performance of the Nocta card with the Strix card, but differences in power targets and clocks make that a bit apples and oranges. Asus spins its GPU to find those that can reach the highest stable clocks, and they end up in the ROG Strix models. The Nocta card ends up at a slight disadvantage. With second-tier GPU and reduced clocks, you can try to manually overclock the card and likely come close to the same performance as the Strix, but there's definitely a difference in the GPU due to binning. How would the Nocta cooler fare with the first-tier GPU? We can't say for certain, though as we'll see later, it would likely do just as well as the Strix design, if not better. This is likely our final GPU review using our Core i9 9900K tested. We've got most of the parts for Core i9 12900K upgrade, which should suffice for at least a couple years of GPU benchmarks, and we'll have to retest everything when we make the switch. We'll also be updating our test suite for 2022, but it was still the tail end of 2021 when we wrapped up this review, so let's roll with it. All of the RTX 3070 cards were retested with the latest, at the time of testing, NVIDIA 497.9 drivers. Though the 497.29 drivers came out a few days after testing was completed, it's worth noting here that none of the other RTX 30 series GPU were retested in the past 2 months in at least one game. Assassin's Creed Valhalla appears to have benefited from recent driver or game updates. We currently test third-party cards with our 13-game test suite, running at 4K, 1440p, and 1080p at Ultra, or equivalent settings. We'll focus primarily on how the Asus RTX 3070 Nocta fares against other 3070 cards, though we'll have representatives of the rest of the current AMD and NVIDIA GPU in the charts as well. Each test setting gets run multiple times to ensure the consistency of our results. NVIDIA's RTX 3070 currently ranks as one of the most popular RTX 30 series GPU, according to the Steam Hardware Survey. Grains of salt and all that. But only the RTX 3060 for laptops ranks higher in the API data, by 0.2%. The Asus 3070 Nocta model does implement NVIDIA's LHR, Light Hash Rate Mining Limiter, which drops Ethereum mining performance down to around 42 mH/s after tuning. But for regular gaming, the newer spins of the RTX 3070 should perform just as well as the older variants. Note also that the Strix White card is a non-LHR card and can do around 60 mH/s at mining. If that's what you're after, it's effectively been discontinued and replaced by a V2 LHR variant now. The combination of a huge cooler and large fans plus a decent factory overclock means the Asus RTX 3070 Nocta should easily eclipse the reference 3070 Founders Edition in our test suite. It does, with an overall advantage of 5.4% at 1080p Ultra. The Strix RTX 3070 meanwhile comes in just a touch ahead of the Nocta model, leading by 1.8% overall, not something you'd notice in normal gaming. But the higher boost clocks do make a minor difference. Looking at the full suite of individual results, the Nocta leads the reference card by anywhere from 1.4%, Far Cry 5 to 8.5%, The Division 2, which is basically expected behavior. A few of the games in our suite tend to hit CPU bottlenecks at 1080p, though even at higher resolutions we'll see fairly similar results. One thing we don't really see is the impact of only having 8GB of memory. The Nocta card was still about 7% faster than AMD RX 6700 XT, and the margins will grow at higher resolutions where AMD Infinity Cache isn't able to help quite as much. However, there are also games that can start to exceed the 8GB VRAM and will actually favor AMD card. So, hope you liked our video and subscribe to the channel. We will be right there in next video. Take care, bye.